Hey, good afternoon. I'm Robert Klutz. I'm the Executive Director of Clinical Innovation and Improvement for the Commission on Excellence Innovation Health. It's 3:31 Adelaide time. We'll give everybody about another sort of minute or so to get started. But in the meantime, if you have any kind of questions, either now or throughout the course of the session, please just drop them into sort of the Q&A, which will be sort of continuously monitored. And we'll sort of ask those either organically throughout the session or basically the last kind of 20 minutes of the session this afternoon. Is sort of dedicated to kind of that discussion, any kind of questions that come up for roundtable for both kind of Jenny and Firoza, who we're going to kind of present later on. So we'll give everybody about 30 more seconds to start, and then we'll sort of get going from there. Thank you. And now, as kind of while we're waiting to get started, now I feel bad because I was going to do a virtual background, and so then I already first had the conversation. Neither Jenny or Firoza did. Now you just see my kitchen, so let's see, and it looks like Jenny and Firoza are kind of much more smarter and sort of higher, kind of much more technology advanced than I am. So please enjoy my kitchen as you enjoy sort of the much better virtual backgrounds for everyone else. So it's 3:32, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Robert Klutz. I'm the Executive Director of Clinical Improvement and Innovation for the Commission on Excellence Innovation Health. Our role is essentially to sort of partner with both inside the public health system for South Australia, as well as across private health tech industries, kind of biotech innovation startups across South Australia, to promote an ecosystem and to design better healthcare for all South Australians. And so really the best part of my job is to have those conversations with people doing sort of interesting things. And so I think today is a really great opportunity to promote that, not just within South Australia, but globally as well. But before I get started, I'd like to kind of, in the spirit of reconciliation, acknowledge the Kaurna people, traditional custodians of the land which I sit on in Adelaide, as well as other traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connection to the land, sea, and community, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. So again, my role at the Commission on Excellence, Innovation, and Health, when I first started and had the conversations both in the interview and sort of afterwards in terms of kind of really cool, innovative things going on inside the health sector, both sort of globally and nationally and within South Australia, a lot of things that were sort of mentioned was kind of artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, whether it's sort of assistance robotics or kind of Da Vinci surgical robotics, had some conversations about sort of augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality. But one of the things that sort of didn't come up, both in the interview process, my first really couple months, was surprising, was 3D printing. So it wasn't until I started sort of getting out to Tonsley Innovation District, to sort of lot 14, and sort of talking to other innovators, where we realized sort of what a really fantastic breeding ground for 3D printing within the health sector that we had in Adelaide specifically, but it really across South Australia as well. So absolutely some amazing applications within the health space. But we also see that 3D printing really is going to be on the cutting edge to drive innovation inside the health sector within Adelaide, but really other sectors and other industries as well. The other burgeoning industry within South Australia, within the next couple of months, we're going to have Adelaide, we're going to have the Australian Space Agency kind of parked at Lot 14, and we really can't talk about space. We really can't talk about space exploration. We really can't talk about sort of long-term kind of habitat on Mars without talking about 3D printing. If you sort of do any research into kind of the plan for long-term space exploration or sort of kind of human colonization of kind of Mars or other places, it's 3D printing, 3D printing, 3D printing, whether it's kind of 3D printing of habitat, 3D printing of food, 3D printing of tools, materials, sort of kind of medical devices. So it's a really great opportunity to really talk about that more, both in terms of traditional kind of health tech applications of 3D printing, as well as sort of kind of what's next, which I think that's really sort of the conversation we're going to have today. And we're going to start out with Jenny Chen. One of the favorite / least favorite things about sort of my job is traditionally I get stuck talking to folks way smarter than I am. And so we've got two really amazing examples of that, where it's I really like being the dumbest person in the room, and I think that's kind of what's happening today. Jenny is a neuroradiologist, as well as she did her sort of medical education at UCLA, as well as did a sort of fellowship in radiology at a place called, I think it's called Harvard Medical School. Is that, I think they have a pretty good reputation, I think, within the US. Some folks might have heard of them. But as a neuroradiologist, also the founder of 3D Heals, which is much like our mandate, is to build an ecosystem of health tech, healthcare innovation across South Australia. Their mandate is to promote and build an ecosystem of 3D printing in healthcare through marketing, through events like this. And so I'd like to welcome Jenny, and we're looking forward to hearing about your presentation.
Thank you, Robert. That's very flattering, and it's a lot of pressure as well. I'm certainly not the smartest person in the room here, and I'm pretty sure there are a lot of smart people in the audience. I'm happy to interact. I mean, the whole point of this kind of virtual engagement is so that I can meet the smarter people. So I have a couple of slides to tell you a little bit about my journey with 3D Heals and where we are and what my goal is in the short and long term. Let me just share my slide, very short. I promise. So I'm a radiologist, and 5-6 years ago, I can't even remember. It seems such a long time ago. At RSNA, which is a radiology conference, I first interacted with a 3D printed congenital heart disease model. Nowadays, when you have a 3D printed model, you may think this is not a big deal, just like you have your iPhone. But just imagine 10 years ago, we don't even know what iPhone was. So it was definitely a life-changing moment. And it was then that I realized that I'm a lot closer to the cutting edge of technology than I thought it was. I decided to connect with people in the 3D printing community to figure out how I can personally engage and create some of the 3D prints that I saw. And because I'm organizing all these get-togethers and events, it turns out that the landscape is a lot larger than what I initially thought. So the applications of 3D printing is so immense beyond just anatomical models. And there are a lot of new concepts because the learning what additive manufacturing is from a radiology perspective. So anyways, we grew from one community in San Francisco all the way to now 20 all over the world, although the pandemic definitely changed that landscape a little bit more. I like to think that we're a globe because we can now all communicate, use Zoom. So we have 3 missions, and I still think that hasn't changed because of the pandemic. One is we want to connect innovators and early adopters using a single platform, or hopefully many other platforms as well, but 3D Heals is definitely one of them. And 2 is educate people. A lot of people still don't know exactly what 3D printing can do in healthcare, and I think that's one of the roles that me and Firoza here are to serve today. And number 3 is to discover startups and innovators so that people can have a stage to be visible to the investors and to the market. And I think all 3 are very important to me, and I spend a lot of time doing all of them. However, the third agenda is really what my latest focus is. Which is to discover startups and then give them opportunities for funding opportunities. So over the years that I work with 3D Heals and interact with all the entrepreneurs, innovators, engineers, and clinicians, I have also slowly developed, still developing a investment thesis or what I think the future of healthcare would focus on. And it probably is regardless whether or not you're in the US or in a different healthcare system like the UK or Australia. I think decentralized care will continue to prevail. So you don't have to go to the hospital to get labs, for example, or getting routine checkups. That's just one example. Personalized care, 3D printed prosthetics, for example. But overall we don't just want technology that's expensive and inaccessible, but technology that's cheaper, higher quality, as well as accessible. I think that's an ideal goal for all of us, no matter where you are. So here's just an acknowledgement to my tribe. These are community managers all over the world. I mean, these people are volunteers, and they definitely spend their free time during work with 3D Heals. So I'm very appreciative of their time and commitment. This is what it was. This is history when we still could have in-person events. It definitely, it was a different experience. I think you can definitely palpate the energy in the room. And it's an amazing group of people to be with because they're so passionate about what they do. So I invited Firoza as one of our speakers in June this year. And one of the things I love her is because she is so energetic, but unfortunately, she couldn't be there actually in person to present this year. But still, thank you for speaking at our conference in June this year. Anyways, we pivoted. So now we're gonna go entirely virtual, and we engage on a more regular basis using different platforms like Instagram Live and many other webinar or Zoom on a regular basis rather than like one giant conference. We also have an expert corner blog where people write in-depth subjects, like they write pretty in-depth content on a particular subject, like from bioprinting materials to stem cells and point of care, for example, actually is one of Firoza's blogs. And here's infographic of the startups who have pitched through us. We host about 2 startups every month to institutional investors. So these are investors or VCs or corporate VCs, or maybe the lead of a larger angel group. I'm really hoping that 3D Heals can also grow with some of the startups along this journey until they become the unicorn. So that's what 3D Heals is about. And that's my presentation.
So Jenny, one of the things you mentioned was really the application of sort of healthcare 3D printing in terms of sort of decentralized healthcare delivery, and within Adelaide, South Australia, it's relevant everywhere, but it's really particularly relevant here. So my question is, and that's really been the trend: decentralization, moving care outside the hospital and closer to home, really the last 10 or 15 years. But sort of within sort of the post-COVID world, it's becoming more and more important. So have you seen sort of that accelerate in terms of the use of 3D printing to really, I guess, to help manage and mitigate sort of healthcare delivery sort of post-COVID, or is it really about the same, or I guess too soon to tell?
People have attempted to use 3D printing to provide decentralized care. I think one example in the past is the prosthetics in the developing countries where they don't have access to better quality products. This time in pandemic, we have seen the PPEs being produced to become a stopgap measure for the COVID situation. And then people have like jumped into like various design for nasal swabs. Apparently that filled a pretty significant gap. So that's, perhaps you can say that's a bit of a decentralized care. However, I don't feel it's as organized as one might want it to be. You want to be planned ahead. This is like something that you strategize years ahead to make this thing happen, rather than like, okay, we got no other solutions, therefore we're using 3D printing. I think eventually it will happen. I think outside of 3D printing, though, in digital health especially, and various other devices, at-home diagnostics and stuff like that, a lot of these things are already happening. So we're definitely seeing a trend of people wanting to take care of themselves at home. And not just because of pandemic, but also because the cost of time and money to actually go away to see a doctor. And a lot of times it's really not necessary now that we have Zoom, we have all these tools that we can use.
Perfect. So I guess kind of one last question, I guess before question move on, and again, to all the attendees, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to drop them in sort of the Q&A box or sort of the chat box. But as a sort of a neuroradiology is sort of a specialty within a specialty of a specialty. So I guess what was it particularly about sort of 3D printing among all the other potential applications or technology innovation in that space? Because it's a really kind of cool and interesting space, because you can focus on AI, machine learning, kind of imaging AI, you can all sorts of different things. What was it about kind of 3D printing says, wow, I really want to invest a large part of my career in sort of kind of building on this sort of application capability.
So Robert, you're asking me if I'm going to put money in what I'm going to invest in. Is that what it is?
Yeah, well, sure. Also that, yeah, yeah.
So I did invest. I did invest in one company last year in bioprinting. It's called Volumetric Bio. It's a company that came out of Rice University, focusing on light-based, also a similar type of bioprinting technology that can scale up the bioprinting process. So that's one company I put my money in. So that I have to support that. In terms of a potential future, what I'm really looking for is optimization process. I mean, you mentioned AI and machine learning, which is basically the same category of things. I think there are a lot that they can do to optimize the 3D printing process or digital manufacturing in general. It doesn't have to be 3D printing. It can be subtractive manufacturing or whatever. If you can automate, the whole point of, one of the major advantages of 3D printing is that it is a robot, basically, and you can program in a certain way and design things in a certain way so that nobody have to take care of it. But that hasn't really happened. We all have 3D printers and we all have to take care of it. And a lot of those are repetitive failures. And then, I think over time, we've seen quite a bit of publications in the area where people focus on different steps of different 3D printing processes. So like everybody's looking at different process and how they can optimize each single step, from workflow to optimize the temperature to optimize the machine itself. Like there's just so many ways you can do it. So I will look forward to see a company that focuses on this. And not just, obviously, AI is a scary area to invest in because I think it's really expensive because it's such a hot subject. It's as if like anything that's touched by AI is going to become a unicorn, which is not true. A lot of them fail really miserably. There are a lot of limitations to the technology itself. But I've seen quite a few, at least 4 different publications this year alone. And we also invited 2 speakers as well in June to talk about this, and it's quite exciting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess real quick, what we're waiting for, I guess for the attendees, if you could do me a favor, in the chat box, let's kind of think about kind of what your current organization is doing with 3D printing. And if you're doing, so put just the letter A if you're not doing anything at all, put the letter B if you're exploring, you're using sort of basic applications, you're doing it for some sort of kind of basic use cases. Or C, hey, we think we're on the cutting edge, leading edge of applications in 3D printing. So just A, B, or C, depending on kind of where your organization is. So I guess kind of maybe sort of kind of my last question for Jenny before we move on to Firoza. So I guess any recommendations for kind of medical students, so kind of new doctors that want to get better, learn more about sort of 3D printing, any recommendations to sort of take them to the next level in the 3D printing space?
Well, I think one general advice is don't just study, that's all you do, because that's what I did when I was in school. That's all I did. I wanted to get, top of the class, and I didn't really pay attention of what the world is doing. Like, what am I doing is really, like, what am I doing is actually, that part is actually meaningful and why. And I think taking a pause and then, figure out that part is important as well as your medical education. So, in terms of 3D printing, there are a lot of resources available. I'm pretty sure like conferences like this are now a lot more than before COVID, actually. And we do also provide a lot of educational resources as well. But, if you were really interested in, get your own 3D printer. It's getting cheaper and cheaper, and even better, put a 3D printer together yourself to really learn the parts, get deep into it. And it's an amazing tool because you can be very creative, just like computer coding where you can code to be creative. So you can really, figure out something that interests you in medicine. Maybe you want to be orthopedics, and then you could figure out how to design an implant or surgical guide or make some model that make your patient happy. Small things first, but learn the basics of 3D printing. And then it's really the world is your oyster. I'm really excited for these kids.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and that's really the exciting thing, because both 3D printing and the associated software is not quite commoditized, but the price has come down just on sort of the personal use or even sort of basic commercial use, where kind of barrier of entries are much lower than they were kind of 5 or 10 years ago. So that's really exciting. So really appreciate it, Jenny. Kind of really excited to see kind of what's going on in the space, and I think it's really fantastic that we've got an organization dedicated to promoting this, not just from a sort of commercial perspective, but just I think they're just promoting applications, promoting commercial development, and just promoting the ecosystem, because I think it's a really exciting space, really exciting time. Thank you very much. So our next presenter is Firoza Kothari, and Firoza, again, co-founder and kind of chief technology officer for Anatomize 3D. Anatomize 3D, I've kind of known about it for kind of going on about a year or so, and really cool space in terms of kind of, we talk a lot in healthcare about personalized and individual medicine, and what Anatomize 3D is really sort of is the manifestation of that in a kind of really specific way, where they talk about sort of patient-specific solutions, and it's patient-specific solutions in terms of an individual's MRI, individual's kind of CT scan. So doing kind of 3D printing, not just generically for medtech solutions, but crafting solutions specifically for individual patients, which I think is a really an amazing and kind of transformational thing. So again, the co-founder of Anatomize 3D, as well as being the head of product development and 3D printing for other healthcare companies. So thanks for joining us, Firoza, and we're looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you so much, Robert, for having us as well. And I think we're going to find out why having your kitchen as your background was a very nice idea for me, for my presentation. So contrary to Dr. Jenny, I mean, I've known her for a year now, and it's been amazing. And Dr. Jenny, the work that you do in getting everyone together is really, really good. And I have a lot of slides as opposed to her a couple of slides going in and being very quick and precise. So I'm just going to quickly shift to, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go ahead with that. But while I do that, there is one thing that I want to digress into a little bit, and I want you to ask you guys to imagine a situation where you are cooking your most favorite food today, and you can imagine Robert's kitchen for that if you'd like. So while you're doing that, imagine that, say for example, you're making pasta and you have your herbs in the hall, you have the butter and the salt and the oil in the bathroom, and you have something else, say, laying down in the attic. Now, that is going to be really difficult, right? Like when you start cooking and you realize that all of these different things are in different places of the house where they're technically not supposed to be. And it's going to take you a lot more time to bring all of those things together and start cooking. And it's going to be really inconvenient. But that is what 3D printing is all about, wherein it brings everything together in one place, like your kitchen. So you have the butter and all in the fridge, you have the salt right there below the stove, you have all of those ingredients in one place, which allows you to give more control over what you're planning to cook. So this is exactly what 3D printing is all about. And I'm going to be speaking about a lot of different applications, how 3D printing has grown in the healthcare industry over the years. And I just don't want to build a rosy picture. There are a lot of other limitations or challenges also with 3D printing that we've observed over the years, but there are ways to work over it, and we might discuss that also a little bit in short. So let me go ahead with a little bit of the history. Just a second. Yeah. And yeah, you already imagined Robert's kitchen, so I'm going to skip this part. But 3D printing was invented in about 1980s, so it's been a very, very long time since the technology has been existing globally. And the healthcare industry was actually quite quick into figuring out its applications over here as well. So in 1990s, I think there was the first case that happened using 3D printing. And a lot of it has been happening globally across the US, Europe. What Dr. Jenny has been explaining, her experiences are a little different than my experiences in India, but nonetheless, everyone's catching up across the globe. And this is a lot of data on the screen, but don't worry about it. I just wanted to show you a chart where we've gone through the hype curve, we've come back down, and now we know exactly what works, what does not work, and now we are again on an upward trend. So to give you a very simple process flow how this works, is that since we are working on patient-specific or patient-specific anatomies, we require the patient data. So this we get from the radiology data sets, which is a CT scan, an MRI scan, an echo scan of the patient itself, which are basically 2D slices, one above the other, which are layered, which we combine together to create a 3D out of those 2D stacks. So we get the data, a case planning is done wherein we understand the region of interest, wherein we understand what the surgeon really wants, what is it that they're intending to do, or what is it that they're intending to find out with the help of the model. And this entire back and forth with the surgeon helps us understand these applications, choose the right 3D printers, the right materials which would help serve their application, because not every material can serve every application. So that entire process takes place. Then we go ahead with the right technology, material, and the post-processing, and then we provide it to the surgeon. So this is an entire regular end-to-end process flow, which is generally followed no matter where you go across the globe. Now, coming to applications, the first very basic or the most obvious application is that of making the patient models itself of the anatomy. Since you're working on the CT MRI scans, the first thing that you're going to extract is going to be the anatomy models. So I have a quick video over here to show you of the very first case that we had done 6 years ago. This was of a 6-month-old infant who had a cardiac disease. So had a DORV, both the arteries opening up into the same ventricle. And that time 3D printing was not really big in India. No one had done soft tissue applications over here. We were really scared to take this up, but it was a great challenge to do it. But these medical team had seen it somewhere in US that 3D printing is being utilized, and they wanted to give it a shot over here as well, because without that, they thought that the patient could not be operated on at all. So when they came to us saying that, this is something that we're looking at, we want to see first whether the patient can be operated on or not. And 2, if the patient can be operated on, what is the best possible procedure that we can do to give the child the maximum life that he can live. So we went ahead with the designing, we 3D printed out the models, we gave it to the team, and they realized that not only can they do the surgery, but also they had plan A, plan B, that maybe if the best surgery doesn't work, we can go in for a less complex surgery, but they realized seeing the model that the most complex surgical procedure can be performed. So this was one of the best feelings, I think, that we had, the feeling of satisfaction of being able to help a 6-month-old child get the best life that they can expect. And of course, the medical team, they got a new way in which that they can look at treating their patients in some very complex congenital heart diseases. So this is one, this is where we started, and then we shifted across to a lot of different specializations. So now applications exist in all of these specializations that we see. There's neurosurgery, oral and maxillofacial, ortho-oncology, hepatology, urology, orthopedics, spine, you name it, anything basically that can be visualized on a CT or an MRI scan can technically be 3D printed, but yes, of course, there will be practical concerns at a lot of place, but theoretically, yes, it can be 3D printed and can be used for surgery. These are a lot of different examples in different specializations. I'm not going to go in detail on this because of lack of time, but the point to show them over here was that there are different ways in which you can use it in fractures, in tumors, in deformities, in secondary revision corrections. All of these different places, these models can be used to plan a surgery on. So going to the next application, making anatomical models, yes, is the first application that we have, but how do you make it, how do you make 3D printing more personalized, which gives the surgeons the control during the operation to put it on the patient and then help them do the surgery. So that's where the Osteotomy Guides comes into place, and this is another case study that I want to share of an osteosarcoma, wherein this is a really huge tumor that you are seeing on the pelvis of the patient. She was about 22 years old, was on heavy medications, had a lot of problem walking, and of course a lot of social dilemma as well while she was going out in public. Even though that is secondary, it can be a huge role in a patient's life. So here, if you'll have a look at the cut sections that are there in the 3D model, they are quite angulated, they are not straight cuts. And given the size of the tumor, the way in which the patient was oriented on the operation in the OT table, it would have been very difficult to find these exact cuts. They would have to take small cuts, go ahead, take another cut, go ahead, take another cut. So that really increases up on the time that takes for the surgeon to finish the surgery. And plus, you're not really sure whether you're cutting less bone, you're cutting more bone, if all the tumor has been removed or not. So a cutting guide like this helped the surgeon reduce down their surgery time from 3 hours to literally 10 minutes. I was there in the OT and I saw them planning it quickly for 5 minutes before they put the jig onto the patient. They placed it, and in literal 10 minutes, they were able to cut the tumor precisely at the right angles, preserving more original bone and removing all of the tumor from the patient. So this is another application, and I'm sorry if the tumor image is a little too gory, but it was important to show the size of the tumor and the angulated cuts that are there over there. So similarly, there are other different types of osteotomy and screw guides. So you can use it in oral and maxillofacial for free fibula flaps. You have tumors. There are different aesthetic corrections like Lafort corrections. And of course, in spine scoliosis, one of the major applications, because you really cannot see in the pedicle screw where the direction it is going in. So in such complex scoliosis cases where you have the option to automatically guide the surgeon where to put the screw, it is something that they can quickly finish off the surgery, and they can put in more screws than even they had anticipated. So it gives them a better opportunity to perform a complete surgery than put just some screws and move out. So this is a second application. The third application is that of customized implants. Don't worry, that skull is not all of one patient. I've just put it all together to show you the applications. But to start off with, we started off with more non-load bearing implants, wherein we were doing cranial implants, we were doing maxillofacial reconstructive implants, orbital flows, mandibular tumor replacements. And the idea was to see how much 3D printing is helping in customized implants segment for the patients. And we really saw that a lot of these a lot of these things that you see on the screen, there was no proper solution out there for cases like this. So when you are able to provide a customized implant to these patients and even other patients who don't require so much customization, still the output is way better. The aesthetic outcome as well as the functional outcome, both of these are way better when you're going in for customized implants. And what you see on the right is that of an osteosarcoma implant, wherein a regular plate would have definitely not fit the patient well. I was talking about 3 hours for cutting the tumor. It takes almost 1 hour to plate or to contour a regular plate onto the patient's leg after the surgery is done. So with implants like this, it's literally a moment of 5 minutes, wherein all they need to do is place and put the screws. And it really helps them shape the bone as well to the contoured implant. So this is another application of customized implants. The next one is that of custom prosthetics. In custom prosthetics, these are a lot of different examples done by companies across the world, like Handy, Enable, etc. And what they do is they scan the hand or the leg, depending on what type of a limb it is. They 3D scan these parts, they bring it onto the computer, and they customize the other side, which needs to be replaced or fitted with, to match that of the patient, along with giving the functionalities. So earlier prosthetics used to be very bulky. They used to be they used to weigh a lot. They were not very mobile, and also they did not look that great. So with the help of customized prosthetics and 3D printing, there is a possibility to customize it for the patient, so it looks and feels and is in the size of that of the patient. And of course, you can choose different colors, you can make it look aesthetic, you can play around with the designs. There's so much more customization that you can bring to the table on prosthetics. So this is one of the examples that we had done, wherein we 3D scanned the POP cast of that of a patient who had lost 3 fingers. And we were able to create a custom implant, a custom prosthetic from one of the open source designs that was available online by Gyrobot. And we customized it to fit only those the 2 fingers of the patient and be able to give freedom for the 3 fingers. So these are some images of how he was able to hold the pen, pick up some things, and be able to move his hand. Similarly, in custom orthotics, the current orthotics, POP casts, etc., they cover up the entire skin a lot. So it causes a lot of itching, it causes perspiration, plus beyond a point, you have to go and keep changing as and when the swelling reduces. So these types of custom orthotics help you with, of course, changing the design, but also making it very lightweight, making it breathable, and making it look as good as the way you want and flaunting it later as well. So you have examples of limb orthosis, the casts, then you have examples of insoles, scoliosis braces, as well as AFOs over here on the screen. Similarly, in infants, this is one of the projects that we very dearly take up. I have 2 nephews that I love very dearly, and if I even have to imagine them going through something like this, it scares me. But basically, craniosynostosis is a condition where the sutures of the skull of these infants are fused, and they either go in for surgery or a correction of the helmet, so the skull is required. So with the help of these helmets, the skull is guided in a direction to take the correct shape so that the brain does not go under any suffering. And wherever it needs to provide pressure, it pushes it over there. Wherever it needs to release pressure, it releases it from there. And that's how it molds the patient's skull. The infant's skull over here. So this is another orthosis which is done in the pediatric section. In veterinary as well, this is a case that we had done very recently. This African grey parrot would seeks a lot of attention, and whenever the attention was not received, he would just go ahead and eat up his wings. So in order to be able to stop him from doing that or bending his neck, we went ahead and we designed this neck brace which fits onto his neck, and so he's not able to move way too much. It gives him some amount of mobility, but not way too much, so that he is restricted from going ahead and clipping out his wings. So again, in veterinary also, including all the other applications that we spoke of, this is another application that can be used in veterinary as well. The next big application is simulation models with all of the different types of cases that you can accumulate, all the defects, all the anatomies, all the disease models. They can be used to teach fellow surgeons, to teach the new trainees, the residents, the nursing staff, different types of procedures that they might expect to perform later in their practice, and prepare themselves way earlier in their journey. And the materials can be tried to simulate that of a natural body. Maybe we might see that this could be a partial replacement to cadavers. Right now the technology is not there where it can be completely replacing the cadavers, but it's a great way to start off with, to move towards defected anatomies and not just learning on normal anatomy. So simulation and training models is another aspect. Now, I was telling you that there are a lot of challenges that also come across while we're doing this. One is turnaround time. It really depends on when the scan comes to us, how much time we get with the surgeon to do back and forth of designing, whether we are both able to coordinate our timings, and then we 3D print it over here at back end and then we provide it to them. So this might take, say, best case 24 hours, but worst case could also be, say, 4 to 5 days. So that is one of the challenges that we need to work on in bringing the 3D printers either faster or bringing this in-house within the hospitals. Second one is raw data uniformity. Different centers will have different scanning protocols, even though this is changing. Initially, we used to see this a lot, where we would get different types of data, some of which were not workable to create a 3D model. So we had to reject the scans and send the patient again for a CT or an MRI, which could be more radiation for the patient. So this is one of the challenges that we face. The access to the clinicians is not direct, it is via us. So a service provider like us who has the 3D printers, so they need to come to us and then they get access to it. But what if they want to play with it, they want to tinker with it, come up with new procedures in which they can perform the surgery. So that is something that they don't get direct access to, which can lead to slowdown in invention, because if they have direct access, they can play around with the thing. And of course, growth of the community will be much slower. So for that, a point of care lab is something which is an ideal solution because it fits right between the radiology and all the other people who are the end users. So you have medical practitioners, trainees, you can conduct workshops for all the simulation labs and have a proper dry lab on your own to be able to train the people coming in. And at the end of it all, the people that it's going to benefit the most is the patients, of course. So with that, all the different challenges that we were speaking about turnaround time, about raw data uniformity, when it comes in-house, all of these things can be taken care of, and eventually you can see that it will become a standard of care. So I just wanted to quickly add a couple of lines about the coronavirus. Yes, 3D printing has shown how we can decentralize manufacturing and create PPE kits, personal protective equipment across the globe. As Dr. Jenny also mentioned, yes, we just shouldn't do it for the heck of doing it. But we did see in a couple of places where it can really help. We saw face shields, protective eye gear, adjuster straps. Ventilators, there was a huge deal going on around the ventilators, but as Dr. Jenny said, we should only make what we can. So that was something that over a period of time went down. But we've seen a lot of different designs and manufacturing taking place only because 3D printing could provide it that kind of a quick turnaround time in such a case to deal with a pandemic like the virus. So similarly, one of the products that even we made, I'll just quickly talk about it, is an oxy tent, which is basically an oxygen hood, which allows the patient to breathe more concentrated oxygen around his or her face for a longer period of time, helping in increasing the saturation levels and filtering out the virus while they breathe out, so the people, the healthcare providers around them don't get infected very easily. So the road ahead, we've seen soft tissue modeling, we've seen osteotomy guides, custom implants, prosthetics, orthotics, simulators, point of care labs. So the next big thing is going to be bioprinting. It's still a lot in the research phase, but it's basically, instead of printing in plastics and metal, you use the patient's stem cells to be able to print out small tissue organoids of that patient. So right now, it's all in the pharmaceutical stage wherein they are testing out drugs on those tissues to check whether or not that drug will be able to work on these patients. So there's a huge reduction in time to market. If they fail faster. If they succeed, then it can go to clinical trials faster. But with the help of this, there could be a possibility that we may not have organ donors one day. So on that very positive note, I'd like to end this very long presentation of mine. But I hope this was informative, and I'm more than open to questions that anyone would have.
Yeah, and that's kind of the really exciting thing. The first time I held sort of a soft tissue kind of 3D printed heart in my hands and realized the opportunities that gives physicians, because imagine any extremely rare cardiac defects, you can sort of print that out in sort of biosimilar sort of tissue. You can plan that surgery, you can practice that surgery 10,000 times before you actually have to do it. And it's literally kind of saving people's lives. And the other example I kind of shared previously, Boston Children's Hospital had a really complex kind of pediatric patient with a really complex cranial defect. They used 3D printing to print that out and plan the surgery and practice the surgery again over and over and over again. And we're able to really kind of, what was a really complex, really severe kind of cranial abnormality. It's now a kid who's kind of living a kid's life as everyone should. And the other really exciting application is on the custom printed kind of prosthetics. If we look at sort of the US, had a severe issue over the last 15 or 20 years with soldiers coming back from sort of war with single amputees, multiple amputees, and being able to have a really cool, customized 3D printed prosthetic. It's really life-changing, not just from the clinical applications, but from mental health applications, the human-centered sort of aspects of it, not just from the prosthetics. You sort of talked about the skull-shaping helmets in terms of adoption, in terms of fitting in, and having a sort of cool 3D printed prosthetic or kind of helmet can really make the difference between sort of being kind of socially accepted and not, and sort of the self-esteem that goes along with that. So one of the things you talked about, sort of the sort of permanent kind of 3D printed kind of implants. I guess any application for sort of bioabsorbable material kind of implants So I guess both in terms of kind of bioabsorbable application as well as kind of any particular sort of use cases that may be sort of relevant that you could think of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I personally have not done that yet because it's still in a very research phase. And across the world, actually, there's no such material which has been, say, FDA approved or CE approved, which can go into the human body on a commercial basis. But yes, on a clinical trial basis, there are a lot of research institutes and companies across the world who are working on composites of PLLA, which go as a bioresorbable material for, say, the tracheal stents. There are ones of calcium phosphate and hydroxyapatite combinations, which are for bone reconstructions, which have been tested. Until last year, they were tested majorly on animals. But this year, I've seen that they've gone for clinical trials for humans as well. So maybe a few years down the line, maybe 5 years, 8 years down the line, we might be able to see that being out there available for patients. So we'll be able to use these bioresorbable materials, which you can set the time, say 6 months, 2 years. Beyond that much time, it's going to resorb and your normal bone will regenerate and take that space. But there's still some time before we can properly comment on it, whether or not it's actually going to work. So we wait, but it's in process. It's working. Maybe Dr. Jenny could also throw some light on that because she's working with people in that space.
Yeah, there are a couple companies came in mind. One is called Osteopoor, it's a Singapore startup. I think they use hydroxyapatite composite. I'm not really sure exactly what but they did clinical trial in human. I think they had human clinical trial. I think it's actually in Australia, but I have to double check on that. And then there's another startup called Particle 3D, and they focus on calcium phosphate, and they're doing really interesting work. And they only did it in animals. I think I'm seeing a lot more in terms of bioabsorbable materials in bone, like trying to simulate bone material. I have seen another startup from Paris or France that they have a 3D printed, I guess, mesh or some kind of scaffold for people who had breast cancer status post mastectomy. And they want to create this kind of structure that makes the woman have, a symmetric looking chest. And then that material is bioabsorbable. So I'm blanking out on the name of the company, but I can certainly look it up. It's still there. So those are some examples I've seen.
And really, that's the exciting thing. Like a lot of kind of technology and innovation applications, it's literally kind of watch the space, and kind of what was kind of innovative state of the art sort of 2 weeks ago is now sort of kind of business as usual, and there's sort of a new exciting thing. So I think that's the kind of really amazing thing. So I guess for both sort of Jenny and Firoza, so one of the questions was, if you're a research institute or a sort of a hospital or sort of clinic that's not doing 3D printing yet, and so how and sort of when and sort of where do you start? What's the best kind of step 1, step 2 to get started in 3D printing?
Well, I think go ahead, Firoza, you go ahead.
Please, I'll take it next.
Yeah.
Oh, we're both so polite. So I think the biggest question is, why do you want to have a 3D printing lab, right? If you have enough, so it's not just a technology question, but also an economic question as well. So, if you have enough volume, say those highly complex congenital heart disease, and, and you get enough reimbursement from the government or payers, then you can certainly have a 3D printing lab to make your procedure more efficient and safer, which will add patient satisfaction and branding to your facility. So the first question is, ask why. Is it worthwhile because there is definitely significant capital investment, no matter what you do, to set up a 3D printing lab. I have written a bunch of guides on our blog. You can certainly check it out on the blog, and it kind of is a 101 kind of piece. It's definitely not some of my other more respected colleagues at Stanford or UCSF. They have more experience, when it comes to deeper questions about how to set up a lab in a hospital. But I think those guys that I presented on our website definitely answer the basic questions of some of these operational management questions, from setting up to the financial spreadsheet, some of the major personnel you should consider and things that you may not even knew that you should have to worry about, which is safety, material management, and storage, and stuff like that. So.
Rosa, anything to add?
Yeah, and I agree with most of that. Just a thing or two to add. Along with all of that, what also can be answered by them is what is the final application that they're looking at doing. So there is no set protocol per se, or like case studies that if you want to run a lab, say do X, Y, Z, and it'll be a successful lab. That's not how it works. Since it's customization, it really depends on what you guys also want to do with it. So customize the entire experience based on what you all want. So if it's a specialization for orthopedics, then you will have a different set of questions to answer. So you look at anatomical models, jigs, implants. If it's just for soft tissue modeling, then you look at anatomical models in a more complex simulated environment. So along with answering all the other questions on operations, on applications, if this front did combine the two together, they'll get their own customized experience with it.
So let's take that sort of beyond kind of step one, step two, step three. Let's say there's a research institute, let's say the hospital that's doing some 3D printing, they're doing orthotics, they're doing potentially implants, they're doing prosthetics. What do you see as sort of the most underutilized sort of application within healthcare that kind of health systems, hospitals should absolutely be thinking about, should be doing now?
If you were to ask me, like how CT and MRI scans and X-rays have become something which is something that you have to do before you go in for surgery. A 3D model, like just going in for initially a 3D model, is something which is going to make the surgeons so much better at pre-planning, and it will help them compare not just the 3D model and understanding it, but even visualizing the 2D anatomy in 3D themselves. So it will help them increase their experience in a much faster way. So no matter what the situation is, if just mainly anatomical models. Right now, jigs, implants, and all is a way ahead in the curve. But right now, if that can be made a standard of care, it is something that will help benefit the surgeons. It will benefit the patients as well, because the patients know exactly what they are going to get into. So agreements for going into a surgery can also be much faster. They'll be more convinced and they'll be more satisfied. So I think that is one thing which is a little underrated, which it does not happen for all types of cases. Maybe with time, when technology cost reduces, it becomes faster, we'll see that happen. But it's something that I'm hoping should happen in the future.
Yeah, so I want to add on to what Firoza just said. Absolutely agree. That I think I want to expand on that is now that, I've been a radiologist for almost more than a decade, we have so much data and we have so many ways now to represent this data either in a 3D printed model to VR, AR model. I mean, we can interact with these digital data in so many different ways now. Why are we still looking at 2D? But unfortunately, a lot of people going into surgery, I mean surgeons who go into surgery for the first time looking at your internal organs in 3D, I mean, how comfortable do you feel when they're going into your body for the first time looking at your 3D? When we absolutely have the tools to look at these 3D and give them the kind of experience they would have not have, I said 5-10 years ago. Now we have all these tools. They should be able to get a much better practice and experience before they have to go in.
So a couple of the questions for the audience before we get to that. One of the questions when I talk to sort of either product developers or service developers, one of the things, particularly in Australia, they talk about sort of the TGA approval process. So from a regulatory perspective, and when they talk here in Australia, a lot of times they talk about, if I want to get something approved from the TGA, the easy thing is to go over to Europe, get a CE, or go over to the US and sort of get the FDA stamp. So any recommendations or thoughts on sort of the regulatory environment associated with kind of 3D printing, particularly, I think you probably have the biggest impact on sort of implants.
So actually, I think implants is getting more and more favorable. I mean, I've seen definitely like at least a dozen getting 510K clearance from FDA. I think a lot of people looking at FDA clearance as a sort of a standard. And that just says that the field is getting more standardized. The process is more repeatable. It is a more acknowledged process. So people can have a very established pathway to get through the regulatory pathway. As opposed to, a couple of years ago, we don't know what they're thinking. So at least from an implants perspective, and we're talking about not patient specific, but just 3D printed implants, this is getting more and more standardized. And from anatomical model is used actually now, is regulated as a diagnostic tool by the FDA perspective.
So I guess maybe two more questions before we kind of wrap up. Kind of one of the kind of questions that's come up is that if we're thinking about, hey, if we've got either 3D printing background or engineering background, we want to get into sort of the healthcare 3D printing space. So I guess what are sort of the best applications, use cases, sort of market segments to sort of kind of that have the highest upside, that it would be great for a startup organization to get into, and then sort of what are sort of kind of steps 1, 2, so 3 for that?
Again, yeah. Again, I think this is very similar to the 3D printing lab setup, where this field is something which is, even though it's been 30 years old, it's comparatively new in the healthcare segment. So it really depends on what your passion is. What is it that you want to do? The healthcare segment is not easy. It takes a while before you can learn to be clinically right, be technically right. So do you have that kind of patience to sit through it and to learn through the entire process? Are you passionate enough for the healthcare industry in a manufacturing segment to want to take up something like that? If yes, great. What aspects of it? Are you interested in rehabilitation? Are you looking at dental? Are you interested in surgical? So all of these questions, once answered by themselves, I think will chart out a plan. I'm not so sure if there is a fixed place which will tell you that this is guaranteed success, this is guaranteed downfall. It's very dynamic right now. Things that we thought will not work 3 years ago have started working today. And maybe what's working today will not work 3 years from now. So it's a very, very dynamic industry, growing every day. Maybe 20 years down the line, we'll have written protocols of what works, what doesn't work. At today's stage, we are not there at all.
Yeah, so one thing I really love about Firoza is that she's extremely adventurous. I can see that when I talk to her. And I would say the same advice goes to anyone who wants to go into healthcare 3D printing. This is not an established field. This is not something university routinely offer degrees so that you can get a job in a big firm down in a couple of years. This is something you have to explore, is a path that's less traveled right now. So it's exciting, at the same time, it's a little scary. So I would say my advice would just be extra curious and be extra courageous. You know, get in touch with us if you have questions or you want something. Ask questions, explore all the internet information that you can get, maybe sign up for some degrees that you can get, that's mini degrees outside of your university, something like that. Just, you know, take a risk every day. I'm not saying take really serious, you know, dangerous stuff. What I'm just saying is, you know, do something that you wouldn't ordinarily do.
Excellent. So maybe sort of last question, and we'll share contact information. We'll share the presentation later on for the other questions. But one of the questions at the beginning, sort of Jenny at the beginning talked about iPhones. It used to be, I'm really excited about getting the iPhone 3. You buy an iPhone 3, spend $12 million on it. And 2 days later, they come out with the iPhone 4, the iPhone 5. And kind of 3D printers are sort of the same way. We talked about they're advancing really quick, and they're really affordable. So one of the questions was, if we're worried about obsolescence, if we know that sort of these technologies changing really quickly, do we wait or do we sort of invest now? And sort of what's the short, kind of easy answer? Well, it's maybe not easy answer. What's the short answer? Yeah.
So I saw that question actually in the question line. I was thinking about it, and I'm glad that you brought up the iPhone situation, which is, you know, kind of crazy that you want to buy a new phone every time a new one comes out. But think about another thing, which is a CT scanner or MRI scanner. Very huge investment. Usually, you know, used to be a couple $1 million each machine. I have seen practices, which I'm not really totally endorsing it, but they've been using it for decades. And those machines is definitely making money for them. So it comes down to what the end application is. And if this is becoming a sustainable business practice, let's say that you spend $500,000 investing in a Stratasys machine that's excellent right now. And if you can churn out enough surgical volume to justify that in the next 5 to 10 years, you know, or something that's projection, it's not going to be obsolete anytime soon.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. We're right at time. We're right at 4:30 Adelaide time. honestly, like I said, the first time I talked about the example, first time I held this kind of soft tissue 3D printed heart in my hand, this is sort of game changing in terms of kind of saving people's lives and sort of transforming healthcare, both within South Australia and across the rest of the world. So I think hopefully we kind of learned a lot. We will share the presentations. We have been recording the presentations, so we'll share that through kind of social media over the next week or so. We'll also share contact information among sort of the panelists and myself. We had some questions about what can the government promote to do this. And I think things like this, in terms of highlighting, hey, here's the use cases, here's the technology, I think is kind of step one. But really, thanks for joining us. I think this is webinars like this are something we want to promote as much as possible. And particularly, I'd like to thank Jenny Chen and Firoza Kothari for kind of sharing their expertise and really passion and experience with us, because I personally have learned a lot. I'm looking forward to following up sort of more and more. So thank you both, and we'll sort of kind of look forward to kind of hearing more about this in the future. So thanks thanks to the attendees as well. I think hopefully it's been great all around.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you, Dr. Jenny. Bye.
Bye. Take
Bye.
care.
Take care.